Father came home. After many battles, the rules had changed and he no longer had his old job. He now had jobs without rules, and he trained me for this work too. Today on the Comic Book Report, Cover Volume 1 by Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I have an independent comic book review coming all the way from Dark Horse Comics. This is Cover by Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack. Admittedly, I only heard about this series after having it promoted directly from David Mack at a comic book signing I went to. I actually have a video about that on the channel if you're interested. But Mack couldn't have been a nicer guy, and he was promoting this work, and I was really a fan of both him and Brian Michael Bendis, so this was a no-brainer for me. I finally had a chance to sit down and read it, and I'm so happy I did. I can't wait to talk about it today. Before I do, though, I want to shout out the channel's sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, The Comic Book Report, to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it is a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were created by Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack, and illustrated by David Mack. The comics in this volume were published by Dark Horse beginning in 2018. The volume itself collects Cover issues 1 through 6. And finally, this is a standard size trade paperback edition with glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 176 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that standard size trade paperback from Dark Horse, and right away, I think this is just a really well-made paperback edition. No real bells or whistles here, just a really sturdy exterior here, some great, nice paper stock, no complaints from me. The cover design, I just really love. We have some of David Mack's trademark kind of watercolor style. Everything is so beautiful. I love the kind of silhouette we get. It's just really striking. I love all the white space. It just really pops. The spine as well is just a white spine that has some text across it, but it still looks really great on the bookcase. I got that nice little Dark Horse logo on the bottom. Like I said, pretty straightforward here, but it is really nicely put together. On the back of the book, we have some information, a little bit of blurbs, pricing information, things like that, but we also have another beautiful watercolor here outlining a building and kind of have the exteriors being kind of the shapes of plants. This is lifted from toward the back of the collection, but it's one of my favorite kind of single panels of the book. Really, really beautiful. I think in the actual book, it's a splash page or two. Just really striking stuff, really indicative of one of the art styles we see from Mack showcased inside. And speaking of inside, let's take a quick look at that binding. Like I said, it's a glued binding, a little bit of gutter loss potentially, but there is a nice white border around a lot of the pages in this book, the paneling, so we don't really have too much loss to the gutter. Overall, like I said, I think this collection is really well put together. I have no serious complaints here whatsoever. Okay, and as we make our way into the collection proper, I will say again, I got mine signed by David Mack when I went to this signing. I met him and Jim Lee briefly. David Mack I spoke to more extensively about his time on Daredevil, who is my favorite character, and he was promoting this book at the time, and he said he'd throw in an extra signature if I purchased the book, and that was a no-brainer for me. I've always enjoyed David Mack's work, and Brian Michael Bendis's for that matter, so this was a win-win. I bought it some time ago, but I finally had a chance to finish it out, and wow, I really enjoyed the ride. After that cover, we do have a brief introduction by David Mack, a nice little essay there. We have some kind of background into his dynamic with Brian Michael Bendis. Anyway, it teed up the collection quite nicely. It really set the mood. I did enjoy it. With paperbacks, you never really know what the extras are going to look like, so starting with kind of a foreword I thought was a really nice touch. After that, though, we jump into issue 1 of Cover, and we are off to the races. Now, how do I describe this series? Honestly, it's hard. It's one of the most imaginative, unique, and innovative books I've ever read. It definitely has a meta level to everything, and I'll get into that in a moment. But essentially, the setup for this is our main character is a comic book creator of a pretty prolific kind of samurai-era fantasy series, I would say, and he's pretty well regarded in the comic book community. But within this story, we have him kind of introduced to this character who at first seems to be a super fan, but we come to find out that while she is a genuine fan of his work, she is also kind of a kind of intelligence agency representative or agent. She works for something akin to like the CIA or just kind of spycraft sort of stuff, and she basically tries to recruit our main character into this whole world, saying he already has the perfect cover. Basically, being an artist, part of this comic book community, he can go to all of these exotic countries and locales for these conventions or kind of fan appearances without raising too many eyebrows. He can presumably kind of brush shoulders with some of these influential people or policymakers or kind of government leaders without making too many waves, and yet he can have a very serious impact. And before you know it, he's really sucked into this world and completing kind of small scale missions where he doesn't really have optics on the broader picture of what's happening. No, in many ways he's at the mercy of this female agent who kind of recruits him and throws him into the deep end. She sort of plays his handler throughout most of this series, and we kind of have these sort of like little stories that happen across the 6 issues where he is going about his life and all of a sudden he sees her again, or he's at a convention. We find out that she pulled strings to get him there, or in some cases she set up the whole event as a cover to kind of get him to move pieces around kind of geopolitically. It's really a fascinating book in that regard. I would say it's one part like spy narrative, one part kind of meta reflection on being a comic book creator, I presume, and then also just like a really interesting kind of examination of artistry and even kind of feudal Japan or Asian cultures. We have this comic book creator's most well-known work, again, being kind of this throwback to kind of the samurai era. Every so often we get glimpses of that throughout as well that seems to kind of thematically resonate with the rest of the work. But we have all of this stuff going on. We have him at these comic events, and we have him kind of in spy mode, whether or not he really wants to be or not. Throughout this book, we have him engaging with other comic book creators that in some cases have been recruited by other spy agencies as well. We have kind of a torture capture scene. We have some great flashbacks. We have one episode that appears to be in his head maybe while he's unconscious, or kind of represented as a new comic book he's working on about a sad astronaut in space. Again, this sounds pretty just divergent and all over the place, but there really is something incredibly captivating about how it's all put together here by Bendis and Mack. Everything just works pretty seamlessly, and I think as someone who does have a more creative kind of brain, there's a way in which it reflects on that kind of artistic soul or nature that just flows really well and is really obvious in the storytelling in a way I felt was super enchanting, if I'm honest with you. Something I have to talk about as well, going over to the art side of things, we have the art provided by David Mack. We have some digital colors as well by another artist, but David Mack did the primary interiors of this book, and I think we see more range in him than I've ever known, and that is really high praise because I think his work is just jaw-droppingly beautiful. In my mind, David Mack, when I think about him, I think about this very distinctive watercolor style he has with a lot of his artwork, and that's definitely present in Cover. However, we get a lot more than that. We have kind of this more subdued, blue-hued, kind of just, I don't want to say sketch work, but it's almost a pulled-back kind of character rendering, and this is really the primary way the art unfolds across the main narrative. As things are more mundane and just basic comic booky. Things feel less distinct, less outlined. They're more kind of just fading into this drab blue background. And like I said, all the models and just the detail work is incredible in here. I love the style of this as well. But as we get more into the spycraft, as we get more intentional character interactions, it's almost like the characters are bolded. They have more of an outline. They have much more detail work. And then as we get into more of these incredible spy scenes, the art gets a lot more intense, vibrant, and punches out quite a bit more. We also have scenes as things get really imaginative and interesting, where we have those flourishes of David Mack's watercolor style. We also have a look at some of this comic book creator, the fictional comic book creator's own fictional work within the story. Like I said, the kind of samurai story or the sad astronaut. And we have very distinctive styles in there as well that set it apart from the other main art styles. We have another comic book creator or two that have their own distinctive styles. So we have just a gambit of different amazing art styles that are all presented by Mack in these 6 issues. I really think that this is an incredible achievement, and whenever we have an artistic change, you just know that story-wise or thematically, things are really shifting and being underscored, and it really punches out at you. At least it did at me. I was absolutely floored by this book, and I feel like when I wanted to put it down, it got harder to do so, especially as I got into issue 2, issue 3. It was all just absorbing, and I had to finish out the book. Throughout the way, too, we have some beautiful just covers to these issues, mostly provided by David Mack. We are also presented with a couple of variant covers throughout this book, which are also a real joy to see. A couple of which I assume to be kind of comic book industry in-jokes, like a variant cover we get for issue, I think, 6 of this run that has kind of a really odd picture or portrait of Jim Lee that I think was provided by Jim Lee that makes him look like he is one of these agents from a spy agency. I thought that was a really great spin for this book. I used a kind of snippet of that cover in the spoiler warning earlier in this video if you want to check that out. But really, really fun stuff here. I think that actually brings me to another point I wanted to make, which was that there feels like there's a whole meta layer to this, that I am not a comic book creator at this point myself, although maybe one day, but I feel like there's so many kind of in-jokes here that David Mack and Brian Michael Bendis try to make more accessible. We get to see this viewpoint from a comic book creator at things like comic conventions or trying to promote their material or what they get into with other comic book creators, like going out to kind of industry dinners or trying to network and things like that, that feel very true and feel very lived in. And yes, we have this kind of fantastical layer of this kind of other world of international intrigue and espionage and spycraft, but at the core of it, we really have a comic book creator that's just kind of earnestly doing the best he can, pursuing his creative pursuits, but also trying to push himself a bit more to have even more of an impact with some of, like I said, these other implications with the spy agency. But I really love some of the smaller character moments as well. As much as the spy games were all really fun, I did like these little looks into what I assume to be the comic book industry. I think for someone who is such a big fan of this medium, having a book like this is kind of invaluable. It really packages a lot in just these 6 issues, and I think any fan of the medium would really enjoy this book, especially if you're trying to find something a little bit off the beaten path or different. This is by no means a tights and flights superhero comic book. This isn't kind of a big, heavy sci-fi comic book. No, it feels like it is more just slice of life that has this really exceptional quality as well, leaning into kind of spy fiction. But the way it blends genres, and like I said, it ends up being kind of a thoughtful reflection about art and creativity and purpose and fulfillment, and it just touched on so many things in ways I just didn't expect. The characters are all immensely likable, and I will say the cast of characters is rather small, but you really get a lot of great moments with each of them. I do think overall this was very well paced, and I found myself, while I enjoyed the action and more intensive conflict sequences, it was really the slow burn kind of musing character moments that really spoke to me the most, and I think I'll carry with me long after I have finished here. I noted at the beginning too that this is a Volume 1, however I'm not sure if they plan to return to this franchise. Fingers crossed, because I would love more in this world. But what we get at the end is nice kind of closure, and it wraps up that if they never got back to this, I think that this could be a really good one and done story arc as well. Really, really fun stuff here. Now, as we make our way toward the back of the book, I will not spoil every little in and out we get within this book, because I'm really hoping some people go and read it for themselves, but I think it was wrapped up rather nicely. I thought the resolution was immensely earned and satisfying, and I really liked the last little bits we get with each of these characters. A really fun book here. We did not get a ton of extras at the back of the book, unfortunately. We got a couple variant covers within the issues, kind of at the front of each issue, which was nice, and we had that forward. Would have loved to see a little bit more, maybe some behind the scenes art photos, but we just have kind of a couple solicitations for other Dark Horse and books and things like that. But honestly, it was still a really great little trade paperback. No complaints from me. And now that we've reached the end, all that's left to do is to give Cover Volume 1 by Bendis and Mack a grade. For easily one of the most unique and meta writings I have read about the comic book industry, coupled with just dynamic and captivating art throughout from the incredible David Mack, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Cover Volume 1 from Dark Horse Comics a B. This was absolutely an above average read from me, from some of my favorite comic book creators. Admittedly, this title is a bit off the beaten path for me, but I'm so happy I found my way to it. The art throughout it was lush and gorgeous, and I loved all the different styles we got showcased. The writing was also very sharp. I think the dialogue was fun and interesting, and the characters were all really well defined, even for a little 6-issue series. I'm not sure what the future holds for Cover, but should these creators ever return for more issues, I know for one I would be eager to read. Let me know what you think of Cover in the comments below. Have you read this book? Now that you've heard a little bit about it, would you consider picking it up? Do you have favorite works from Brian Michael Bendis or David Mack? Let me know all of that in the comments, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, that comment we talked about, and maybe check another one of my videos out on your way out. Thanks, have a good one.